Dear learners, welcome to this session on educational thinkers. We are now in week 7, and in week 7 we would be discussing different aspects of education related to information, communication and technology. Communication is a very important word, and how we communicate with people and specifically in NGOs, communication plays an important role where how we relate to the people, how we communicate with the society, how we communicate with the volunteers, what technicalities or what skills are required for communicating. All this is very important, and that is why this unit 7 on information, communication and technology talks about the initial stages of education, then the national literacy mission of the government of India, and then we have adult education, then we have sustainable education, we have women empowerment also. So everything is interlinked and related. So we would be discussing different aspects of these in this particular week, and we would be trying to highlight how they are related to NGOs. So when we are talking about the educational thinkers, it is important to understand that it is just not the thinkers. It is how the education is perceived by these people, and whether this particular thought process which they had it in mind way back, say in early 30s or 40s, and then maybe in 50s and 60s, when education was not so prominent, when it was not so popular form of formalized education. Usually people studied at home, and the concept of school was there. People got educated, fine, but there was an issue that usually in those cases, specifically in India, the education for the girl child was not so popular. So they had some perceived notions about education during that time, and we would be discussing those particular points and see whether they are relevant in present context or not, because education is something which can never ever be you can say it's kind of an investment. It can never be useless. So whatever kind of education one is getting, whether it is skilled education, non-skilled education, whether it is a formal education, informal education in any form is very important. Now you see, if we talk about education specifically in terms of girls, and they are at home and they are learning, education is a form of learning. So they are learning, say, cooking skills. Now that also requires education. So you need to know, you need to identify the ingredients which are used for making the food. So people think that cooking the food or cooking is something which is meant only for girls. No. It also requires certain set of skills. It also requires certain set of thinking. It also requires certain set of inherent qualities. It also requires a certain set of education and identification of ingredients. For example, the spices or the pulses. So there are different formats or different forms of education, and we need to understand that what exactly is education. Now, for starting with the educational process, let us first see what is education actually. How do we perceive education? That we need to ponder upon, that we need to think upon, that we need to discuss upon to understand this concept. Now, when we talk about education, we need to understand that why is it so important? John Dewey, a very great educational thinker, he said that education is not a preparation for life. Education is life itself. That means as you grow from the childhood to the adulthood to the old age, you gain experience, and through experience you learn certain lessons, and that in itself is education. I just gave you an example of cooking food. That in itself is education. Now let us take an example of the present complex situation where the pandemic has opened opportunities as well. It is up to us how we take it. For people, it has opened for the doors for new life, in the senses they have inculcated, they had inherent skills which they never realized, and they realized it in this particular situation. Now I'll give you a very good example from my personal life. A very close friend of ours, an acquaintance, an old person, an old man. He himself, he is very good at writing poems. He is very good at cooking, but due to the busy schedule of his life, he never ever realized that this is the basic skill he possessed. And now during the lockdown, during the pandemic situation, these skills, they came forward, and he started working on it, and he started building it, and he started enjoying it. Now that itself is an education, that self-realization, that what you want to do at a particular moment of time which makes you happy, that in itself is education. So education is not preparing you for life. Life itself is an education through which, through certain experiences, you learn how to deal with certain kind of situations. Education does help in getting jobs, fine. Education helps people in identifying themselves, that is important. Education gives people the dignity of work, dignity of labor. It tells you how to self-respect yourself, how to love yourself. So education is, in a broader sense, you say, it teaches you as you grow, as you experience different situations in life. Now let us see how education is related to NGOs. We know education is a way for development. Without education, the development is not possible. Now, I gave you an example of cooking. So initially when you start cooking, you may not be very good at it. But as you develop the skills, as you start learning, as you start inventing, as you start innovating, as you start gathering knowledge from different sources, you start developing new ways of cooking food, new dishes come out. So you see, education is always a way for development. And education has played an important role in independence and freedom struggle. And if you just go back and see the life of the freedom fighters, you would, like Sarojini Naidu, Sardar Patel, you would find these stalwarts, how they educated themselves, how good they were in oratory, how good they were in speaking. They learned all this on themselves, on their own. They got the opportunities, they utilized the opportunities, and that is how they got educated. For NGOs, it is very important to think about educating different communities, and that is why different policies of the government came into picture, joining the hands with NGOs. Usually an NGO, it tends to impart any kind of education in its interaction with the community. So what I mean to say here is education can be formal, it can be informal. So when we talk about formal education, it is like acquiring the degrees. Like on certificates, you say that you have done this particular course or this particular program. But do you actually know about that particular course? Do you actually know the practical aspects of that particular course? That you need to understand. So that is where the role of NGOs come into picture while educating the communities, and how you can build in the awareness level between the different communities of the society. For example, while creating awareness amongst local communities on the issues of malnutrition or child marriages, NGO workers or volunteers, they need to educate them about such issues and laws, which help them in understanding that how to curb malnutrition, how to curb child marriages, and how they can build in a better society. Education should be such that it touches the mind and heart of people to bring the changes in their lives. And NGOs, they use certain educational tools to develop and bring in the changes in the lives of people they are associated with. And in this particular complex situation, you'll get n number of examples where NGOs have educated people about the use of mask, about maintaining hygiene, about maintaining proper diet, to curb this pandemic. So these are certain kinds of issues which needs to be adapted by NGOs, and NGOs should work in such a manner that whatever the crisis situation comes, they adapt to that changing conditions. Now let us take a beautiful example of an NGO which has been dedicated for the education of the poor, and this is Read India. And if you just go to their site, you will find beautiful stories, beautiful examples, beautiful you can say testimonials regarding how they work and they provide education to the children of our country. And the most beautiful part of this is that during the pandemic also, they reached the ruralmost places. They educated those people, those children, through online education. Like I am dealing with you, or I am teaching you through a certain mode, certain platform, certain online platform, they also do so. And this is very interesting to understand. That is why I typically took this example for you, and the source is from readindia.ngo. So the website is already given there. And if you see, they believe that education is tool for empowerment, developing an identity of the individuals. And it is a key to empower the women and the marginalized communities. And if you see the Read India's initiatives, how they have worked for the childhood education, that is quite interesting. And this is very interesting in the sense is that it helps through its read centers, it has helped immense number of people. And if you see the statistics, you'll find that this is the 2018 statistics. They have 10,282 beneficiaries and 1,475 youth who have received certain capacity building training on literacy education. 401 youth have participated in reading and writing programs, that is also literacy. And 467 beneficiaries, they have received training under adult literacy program. There are 173 or 178 volunteers also in the case of, if you see the full site, because the full screen could not come here. So there are other data also. Now if you see the numbers of this particular initiative, you will find through its centers, they have reached to different sections, different strata of the society. Now this is a very good example of a story of change by Vishnu Sharma, a small child of Rural Education and Development Center, Wazirabad, Gurgaon, and now Gurugram. Now in this case, if you just read this story, that how this young child in 6th class, he is the resident of Wazirabad, and how this child who was bright and creative, how he was taught by Read India movement and through this initiative, and who was a child who was shy, who was not extrovert, who was introvert, how he has been brought to the school, how gradually his transformation began through this mission, and how he developed a kind of a passion for reading, and he uses those simple stories and with his imagination, how he relates to those stories, and he works and he helps in the Read India movement. Now he is a happy child with his inherent skills coming out through the education they have provided. Now, coming to the important part, the basic concept of educational thinkers, and who are they? Now, educational thinkers, these are the people who have represented their countries and who have presented their countries with certain educational philosophies. And these educational philosophies, they give direction for imparting education within the country. Prominent Indian educational thinkers which we can think from that era, from the pre-independence era, they are Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore. Apart from that, we could think of more names. You can think of more names and you can write about them. This can be a kind of an assignment for you. So you can write about the educational thinkers you think are inspirational, are role models for you. There are prominent Western thinkers. They are John Dewey and Paulo Freire, apart from Julius Nyerere, and there are many names. Even Martin Luther King can be called as a great educationist in terms of trying to eradicate racism. So they can be different aspects or different thinkers. So it is up to you to decide. So I'm just taking few of them, and we can just relate to their philosophies, try to relate with their philosophies and see if they are relevant in present context or not. Now let us see some of the views of Mahatma Gandhi on education. And he believed that education should be accessible to all, and it should reach the remotest corner of the country. Education should be used for the development of life in rural areas. Education should not be dependent on English language. He believed that it should be dependent on the local language, so that people can relate to whatever is being taught. Learning of a craft, the thrust of the entire teaching program in school. It can be an entire thrust on the entire teaching program. Learning through craft or through activities, it can be a major source of the teaching program. Schools should be self-reliant and have dignified labor. Schools should use handicraft as a source for self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency of schools, this will help reduce their dependence on the states and thereby reducing the political interference, and that independence would provide them to give the education in the best possible way they want. Gandhiji also proposed education for the person, the whole personality as such, like mind, body and spirit, to be fulfilled through this vision. He also believed that education should empower people to handle their own problems instead of being dependency. The main concept of him was that people should be self-dependent, independent, than being dependent on any of these sources, whether it is any other person or the society or the government. And he focused on education as a tool for upliftment of people. And NGOs can use the values of Mahatma Gandhi in using education. How? As a tool for developing the lives of village people and making village communities self-sufficient. And if you just go to on the internet and you will try to search how village communities, they are building up on their own and they are becoming self-reliant, you'll find n number of examples, and these beautiful examples, they are helping the communities to come up and be self-reliant through the awareness programs provided by the NGOs. Now coming to another educational thinker, and he was a great painter, he was a great writer, he was a Nobel laureate, and we are proud to have him as the citizen of our country, but he insisted that learning should not be restricted to books. That means bookish education. He believed that the education should be external in nature, it should not be bookish in nature. Education should be used to develop the intellectual potential and the personality of a child. And I gave you an example of that small child from the Read India initiative, how he was, his inherent skills were being carved out, and how he developed those skills or by interacting with the volunteers of Read India. The child, he believed, Rabindranath Tagore believed that child should learn directly from the nature and the life, because he himself was a self-learner. He never went to the school, and he sat under a tree and he learned on his own. Despite having lots of opportunities, despite having the well-off family, still he learned on his own. And the education should be simple, self-disciplined, based on the virtues of sociability, compassion, and the spirit of brotherhood or sisterhood. These should be the virtues of a student life. He also believed that moral and spiritual values constitutes the most important aspect of education, and the child should be able to use education in daily life. Instead of just getting the degree and not being usable, that doesn't mean that the child is educated. So the child should implement whatever has been taught. So education should develop curiosity, alertness of mind in any student. And education stood for freedom from ignorance and from passion. It should be free from the ignorance. It should have a form of passion, and it should be free from prejudices. This was Rabindranath Tagore's thought. He also believed, just like Mahatma Gandhi, he also believed that education should be in a local language, because the local or regional language will help in connecting with cultural fabric of one's own society. He also valued scientific inventions as they made life less burdensome, but he insisted that technology should not restrict thinking. Now, if you see, we are so used to internet that we are not even ready to. When we type something, the computer has such a software that it immediately reflects that this particular spelling is wrong. Now, what happens in this is that our own vocabulary reduces. So, in this case, the technology is helping us find that immediately we can identify that there is a mistake. But within ourselves, we are not able to learn that particular language properly, and our vocabulary loses down. Our vocabulary reduces to a larger extent. And he laid stress on discussion as a mode of delivery of knowledge. He believed that education should be imparted in natural surroundings. And how can NGOs use the values of Rabindranath Tagore on education? They can educate people in natural surroundings, which most of them they are doing. They're educating people in regional languages and educating people based on their daily activities, what they actually know. Now, if you want to teach something to a farmer, you have to teach the farmer in his or her language. It is then only they will understand what exactly it is. So that is why it is important that we need to see how education will be useful to the society. Instead of concentrating on the fact that we are educated enough and we become engineers and doctors, that will not solve the problem. We do need engineers, doctors, lawyers, or professionals, but we do need literate people, educationists, who can think how education works for the common people and works for the society. Now coming to another philosopher and thinker, Julius Nyerere, and you must have heard about his name, and he is a known politician. He was a known politician who struggled against the colonial rule in his own country, Tanzania. And you see, it was known as a third world country that time, and he also believed in education for self-reliance. You see, all the educational thinkers, they are pinpointing one common aspect, that education should build in your confidence, education should make you self-reliant, education should make you independent, education should make you think what is right, what is wrong. So almost all the thinkers across the world, they have concentrated on this very fact, that education should be self-reliant. And he also advocated that the kind of education that would rebuild the ruins, because in countries like Tanzania and other places, what happened is like there were a lot of mishappenings, and how one can rise through the crisis, that is what is a proper education. So Julius Nyerere also advocated that how one could rise through the crisis and rebuild themselves from the ruins. And if you see the present condition, you'll find that the people, the societies, the organizations who had a proper education, the practical kind of approach towards life, overcame the crisis situation. But the ones who were protected, who were not self-reliant, they went into trouble, and they realized that their mental health is also not stable. So that is how education should be. Work should be an integral part of education. So it should have both the components of theory and practice, and how they can be integrated for a meaningful learning experience. That is what Nyerere every time he insisted on. Julius Nyerere also believed that in developing practical skills of villages through education, that will help in the development of villages, and he also believed that just by imparting the degrees, this will not serve the purpose of village life. So education should be oriented towards the rural life in such a manner that they learn the specific skill-based education and apply it to the benefit of their own community. He also believed that education should make people more confident and self-reliant. Again, the same thing. And the children and teachers should both participate in the decision-making process. It should not be like that teacher should be the decision maker. Because if you don't involve the children in decision-making process, they will never ever grow to make decisions for themselves during the time of crisis. They will always be dependent on you. So importance of examinations is there, but it should be downgraded, because when you give the marks or the grading system, what happens is the kind of demotivation happens when the student doesn't score much marks, though the student may be good enough. So this is important, of course, to assess the skills, assess the requirements of a particular system, but it should not be the most important aspect. Now we come to another philosopher, John Dewey, and who gave certain educational thoughts, and he always referred to education as a social need and the function. He advocated progressive style of education, wherein an individual learns by doing. Now that again comes to, we zero into the concept of Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore and Julius Nyerere, that the practical aspects should be incorporated in education. And thinking is a better way of learning. That means you have to inculcate the concept of thinking amongst the children. They should think, why is it happening? How is it happening? The logical reasoning should be there for everything they learn. And he argued that thinking does not occur in isolation from the social situation. And intelligent thinking can help an individual learn better than any theory. He also believed that education can teach people how to live. But he also argued that only education cannot teach people how to live, the formal education he's talking about. And he criticized the method of rote learning, that means cramming and memorizing, and supported learning by doing and learning by living. That means you live and you learn. You just should not depend on a particular kind of education which helps you in living. He advocated for the growth through freedom, creativity, and dialogue, and he insisted that education is life itself and not a preparation for life. Now coming to a Brazilian philosopher, Paulo Freire, on education and his pedagogy developed in the particular historical and political circumstances of neocolonialism and imperialism. And he classified knowledge into two types: the unconscious and practical knowledge, and the critical and reflective or theory-based knowledge. He believed that the dissemination of knowledge should integrate logic, content, understanding, and the feelings. And he criticized the banking concept of education, where the learner is always treated as a depository. That means whatever you are teaching should go into his or her brain and should be deposited just like a depository, and whenever the time comes, it can be taken out and used. But this doesn't work in the practical concept. And he believed in building presented knowledge by discussion, reflection, and understanding. He also insisted that education cannot happen without the society. Presence of social beings is important for developing thinking, and he believed that teaching should be a democratic process where participation of learner and teachers should be of equal nature. Learning in isolation is very difficult. So that is why we need to build in the teacher in such a manner that the student feels that the teacher is trying to build in a rapport with you, and you have a peer group, and you can discuss with them that whether this particular concept is right or wrong, or it has another perception. Now, when we talk about NGOs and education, there are, as of now, through the website which I have given you, educationworld.in, there are 26 registered NGOs which are solely concentrating on education for the different strata of the society. And all these NGOs, they are working to bring reforms in the society through education. We'll just see the screen recording of this particular NGO, and we'll see that it believes in the concept of that education is meant for all. Now let us see this portal, the www.educationworld.in, which describes that there are 26 NGOs, registered NGOs, which are enabling Indian education and how they are benefiting the society. So we'll just go through this screen recording, and we'll see how these NGOs, they are helping the society. Now, if you see, there are, if we talk about the K-12 education system, which hasn't collapsed completely, it's like from KG to 12th class. It's due to the efforts of the country's private schools. An estimated 2 million NGOs engaged in providing education through direct or supplementary mode. And if we talk about the education system, India's public school education system has been in deep crisis, and because of that, the new national education policy has come up, where they are trying to revive these public education system because they are available in the rural area. But When we talk about the annual status of education reports of the highly respected Pratham Education Foundation, a survey report of NCERT also advised that while deciding the new education policy, the states should be ready and should be willing to stem the intellectuals from their own states, which is not there as of now. And so the government is trying really hard to come up with the new education policy and provide the public education system the base it was when it initially started. And for this, the NGOs, they are helping and they are working on it, and they have been doing lot of work related to it. Now, if we just see and find, I'll just name few of the NGOs which have been working on the education, imparting education to the society. And if we just talk about these NGOs, you will find a few of the NGOs, they have really grown, and they have really grown big. And I took some of the examples like Read India Initiative, I've already taken. Stir Education in earlier sections I have taken. And then you have CRY, Child Rights and You, which is working for it. Akshay Patra, which is working for it. Now in this site you will find all these NGOs who have been working, and there are people who have been instrumental in providing education for all. So Pratham Education Foundation is there, Stir Education is there, CRY is there, Teach for India Initiative is there, and then Read India Initiative is there, then you say Akshara Foundation is there. So there are Bachpan Bachao Andolan is there, Dadi Nani programs are there. So there are so many international NGOs also which are coming to India, and they are working for the benefit of the society. Now this was, you can just go through this site. I have just scrolled in the screen for you, and you can just witness which NGOs they are actually enabled in India for imparting education to the rural masses. Thank you so much.